says it's great to be back ahead of England's friendly with the United States on Thursday. It's 5 o'clock. Our main story is that 2.5 years after the EU referendum, officials have finally agreed the technical details of a Brexit deal between Theresa May's government and the European Union. The BBC understands that cabinet ministers are being called into Downing Street individually this evening, ahead of an emergency cabinet meeting tomorrow afternoon, when they will be asked to approve the deal that's been agreed. But even if they do, there is still no guarantee that MPs will vote for it when they get an opportunity in a parliamentary vote. So with all of that in mind, for the latest, let's join Vicky Young, our chief political correspondent at Westminster.
And Hugh, just to say that that's no longer speculation, we can now confirm with the latest from Downing Street saying that the Cabinet will meet at 2 o'clock tomorrow to consider the draft agreement the negotiating teams have reached in Brussels and to decide on next steps. Cabinet ministers, they're also confirming, have been invited to read documentation ahead of that meeting. So that documentation being that draft of the withdrawal agreement. This is the so-called divorce deal. Now we know, Theresa May has said it many times in public, that 95% of that was done. Cabinet ministers have read most of that, so it's this final part, the 5%, that was the sticking point and has been for so long about what happens to avoid border checks between Ireland and Northern Ireland. It seems now that there is a text that will go to cabinet ministers. The question, of course, for them, does it have the safeguards that they want? They are very concerned, some of them, about the UK being trapped, as they would see it, in an ongoing customs union, which the UK cannot get out of. So how has the negotiating team managed to get round that? What kind of mechanism have they put in place? Is the UK able to leave of its own accord? Can it decide to leave without the say-so of the European Court of Justice, for example? All of these details are what cabinet ministers will be looking at. Many of them have voiced their criticisms, their fears over the direction these Brexit talks were going in. Now is the moment for them to decide, once they've seen the detail, can they back it? Can they back their Prime Minister, or will they be forced to resign because they just can't go along with what she wants them to do?
Just absolutely essential to underline, Vicky, isn't it, at this stage, when we have headlines that say a deal has been agreed, albeit between officials, albeit on a technical level, that shouldn't lead people to think that this deal is the final deal, because frankly there are lots of obstacles ahead still.
Yeah, I mean, it's an absolutely huge moment. Let's not downplay that. The fact that even the technical teams have managed to get to a position where they have got a document, they have completed a document, and they feel that that is the compromise that they can both live with, that is a huge, significant moment after all these months, after all the difficulties that there have been for Theresa May. But yes, as you say, it's now up to the Cabinet, and many of them have deep concerns. Can she take them with her? And if she can, I mean, people are not ruling out resignations at this stage. Could she carry on? Will she put it to a vote here? And if she does, what happens then? And again, you know, even in the last week there have been ongoing problems for her. It's not just those who are very much pro-Brexit, who have concerns that ultimately the UK will be too closely aligned to the EU, not able to really, you know, come up with any of the benefits of being free from the EU as they would see it. But then you have people like Jo Johnson, who resigned as a transport minister, on the Remain side of the argument, saying this compromise is such a compromise that actually it just goes too far and is the worst of all worlds. And there are several Conservatives who feel like that too. So yes, of course, it's a hugely difficult moment for the Prime Minister, even if she does get her cabinet to back that.
Let's just talk through some of the logistics of the next 24 hours, Vicky, because as we understand it, there will be individual meetings this evening, is that right? And then a full meeting tomorrow.
Yeah, so we're being told by Downing Street, they have confirmed in the last few minutes that Cabinet ministers are being called in this evening. I think we understand that the first in is Matt Hancock, the Health Secretary. He has gone in this evening. They're being called in, invited to read documentation ahead of that meeting. Now, they haven't said it's individual meetings. It could be that they go in more than one at a time to read that. But of course, Theresa May needs to know from them what they think of what is before them, because she will want to know ahead of a cabinet meeting tomorrow afternoon, which way this is likely to go, who's happy, who's not that happy with what's going on.
Just a final point, Vicky, before we go to Brussels. What happens if there is no agreement in cabinet? What is the step that is then facing Theresa May?
I think the issue then is who is not willing to go along with it. I mean, let's be blunt about this. If there were a couple of resignations, if they were the less senior cabinet ministers, she could probably wear that, given that David Davis, her Brexit secretary, went, and so did her foreign secretary Boris Johnson. I think she could get through if there were some less senior cabinet ministers. If it's a widespread, large number of them who've decided they can't live with it and would resign, then I think she is in a deep, deep difficulty. And then the talk of a no-deal scenario clearly does ramp up quite a lot. We'll have to see where we get to by the end of tonight, and then of course that full cabinet meeting tomorrow. But she would be, of course, in a very desperate place if she can't get her cabinet to back this. But it doesn't necessarily have to be all of them.
Vicky, many thanks. We'll be back later. Thanks a lot, Vicky Young at Westminster. Let's go straight to Brussels, and we're going to talk to our Europe correspondent there, Damien Grammaticas. Damien, this is a text agreement. I mean, I think it's important just to say that it's an agreement on text, not a deal, because that's a clear distinction. Tell us about the reading of things there.
Yes, absolutely, and a very, very important distinction, Hugh, because this is the text of the legal withdrawal agreement, that divorce agreement that the sides have been working on now for, 12 months since they focused way back last December, particularly on this Irish border issue. And so what we now have is a document that's been produced, huge, 500 pages or so of dense text, which we'll wait to see the detail of, and that is now moving from the hands of the negotiators, the legal teams, the drafting teams, into the hands of the politicians. So we enter a new phase, but in many ways almost a much more difficult and sort of treacherous phase. As Vicky was just indicating there could be many things in this that could be an issue, and that's been one of the real concerns, I think, from the EU side here, is that they know that getting to this point has been very difficult. Whether Theresa May can get this through Cabinet and Parliament is another very big question. And of course, on the EU side, the EU 27 countries will wait to see as well. Their ambassadors have a meeting here in Brussels from the 27 tomorrow evening at about exactly this time, when they will get their full briefing from Michel Barnier's negotiating team. And then, if this appears acceptable in London, it will then pass to the EU 27 capitals for their comments. So there's still a lot of toing and froing to go.
Damien, just a point there about the last few days of negotiation. It's been pretty intense, as we've been reporting. Is there been any hint at all there about how some of these last few issues have been resolved, notably the issue of the Irish border?
Well, what's interesting here is all the talk on this has been that the focus had moved onto the UK's idea of a customs union arrangement for the whole of the UK as a way of avoiding that border in Ireland, between Ireland and Northern Ireland. Now, what the Irish broadcaster RTE has been saying in the last hour or so is that the understanding is that that has worked its way into this exit agreement, this idea of a customs union. That could be in there. The crucial questions then are, how broad is that? What are the conditions that come attached to that? The EU had been talking about the fact that, well, if the UK wanted that, it would have to have level playing field provisions in it. Essentially, the UK signing up to quite a lot of EU legislation, EU rules on things like state aid, environment, workers' rights, things like that, so that UK companies couldn't cut EU side. So that's one thing. How much has the UK had to sign up to? How could the UK exit from that? Is it time limited? Does it have a review mechanism? It appears that it does have some sort of exit mechanism, that the UK can say it wants to leave, and then there's some sort of review process. But then, buried within the text, underneath all of that, it appears that there is probably still that original Irish border solution envisaged by the EU and in case the situation arises, to keep that border free, which would keep Northern Ireland aligned to rules and regulations of the EU, the single market and customs union rules. That original very difficult political thing that Theresa May said she would not accept, could that still be in there? Appears it probably is. So that's another crucial question as well.
Damien, thanks very much for now. Damien Garaticus, our Europe correspondent in Brussels, listening to that with me with interest, and very carefully is Chris Morris, my colleague from the BBC's Reality Check. What do we know about that issue that we've just been mentioning, Chris? And I think that you're in a position to tell us something about the Irish perspective on this.
Yeah, I mean, obviously it's going to be a fairly febrile political atmosphere both here and in other European capitals over the next couple of days. We've had a statement from a spokesperson at the Irish Department of Foreign Affairs in the last half an hour. Negotiations between the EU and the UK on a withdrawal agreement are ongoing and have not concluded. Negotiators are still engaged and a number of issues are outstanding, it says. We are not commenting further on leaks in the media. Now, well. You can make of that what you will. It suggests that there are elements that maybe are in this draft provisional text that the Irish are not entirely happy about. A lot of it probably has to do with the exact wording of this review mechanism about how an all-UK temporary customs union might come to an end, what it could mean for avoiding a hard border in Ireland. We can speculate a lot about it. Until we actually see a version of the text, we can't tell. But I think that statement just gives you a bit of a flavour. We know there's now going to be a cabinet meeting in London at 2 p.m. tomorrow, but there are things and issues that are still on the table. Possibly not just in Dublin, but in 26 other capitals as well.
Well, that's precisely the point, isn't it? Because if Dublin are, being cautious around some of these areas, even though from London's point of view, the draft text might be in a decent shape from their point of view, clearly there are still lots of areas which could be open to negotiation, even at the last few hours.
And the negotiations have been taking place in what they call the tunnel. In other words, this tight little group in Brussels, the idea being that not much information is given out, so that not much information has leaked out. Obviously, Michel Barnier and his team have been keeping other governments closely informed. There are meetings, regular meetings, at ambassadorial level, at ministerial level. But in those last key hours when, a T is crossed or an I is dotted, there are going to be lawyers in other capitals who want to pore over all of those little details as well. And that's why part of the process over the next 2 or 3 weeks is also going to be, in other capitals, time for other countries to say, well, hang on a minute, what's this bit say? And it may not just be about the provisional text of the withdrawal agreement, because don't forget, alongside that, there is going to be a short text, short at the moment, of an outline of a political declaration on the future relationship. Because what we're talking about at the moment is the terms on which the UK leaves the EU. There's a massive negotiation to come on what our future relationship will look like. Initially, that will be a document of no more than 5 or 6 pages. The idea is that that gets expanded with input from the other countries, and hopefully that then forms the basis of the negotiating mandate for the next big negotiation, which starts once we've left, if we leave, on schedule on March the 29th, on what exactly the future looks like for security, for foreign policy, and most importantly, of course, for trade and economic relations.
Just a final point at this stage, Chris, on the kind of timescale we're looking at now. So this draft agreement is there. Let's say the Cabinet approves it, and there may be some division, but let's say the Cabinet approves it, and then it goes to a parliamentary vote. That's clearly a big milestone, but it is not the only parliamentary vote that will need to take place. There will be others too, will there not, in this process?
Yes, so
Cabinet this morning, Theresa May.
If an agreement emerges, a provisional agreement emerges this week, I think that is with the intention of having a special
there's a lot of rumours in
EU
Westminster
summit
right now
towards the end of this month,
Yeah.
25th, 26th, 27th of November, that kind of time, which can then nail this down. There's another EU summit already scheduled in the middle of December, which will be part of the process, but the idea being for the government that you can then push this through what's been called the meaningful vote in Parliament, get that done before Christmas. Now, as we know, no one can tell you whether whatever this provisional arrangement is, the agreement is, whether it will get through the House of Commons. The numbers are really, really complex, really, really tight, and I don't think anyone really knows that. But if that happens, yes, of course, it also has to be ratified in the European Parliament. It has to be agreed by what's called a qualified majority, a supermajority of all the other EU member states. That's roughly 20 out of 27 in terms of size of population. So there are several steps to go. And yes, roadblocks could emerge at any time. So the other critical date, looking a little further down the road, is if we're still at a case of no deal emerging by the 21st of January next year. It sounds like a long way off, but it's only a couple of months. That's when the government would have to go to Parliament and say, right, here's what we're going to do next. So that's only 2 months before we're due to leave. And that's when MPs potentially could become much more involved in deciding how to affect the Brexit process, how to possibly change the Brexit process. So that's why there's a lot at stake this week.
Well, with that talk of MPs, Chris, thanks very much for now. Let's go back to Westminster, and I want to join Vicky Young once again.
Washington.
Just in terms of that you see there, given some of the details emerging, but it's tantalising, isn't it, that we now have this textual agreement
looking at any new
Brexit.
Already with 30 MPs, they feel the same way because they won't be able to see it anymore yet. But cabinet ministers we know are being invited to Downing Street. The Health Department has gone in, he's the first to go in. So they will get to see that text, and then it's up to them to decide whether they feel that they can bring back what Theresa May is putting as that compromise. Let's get a good reaction now here. We don't know many details, but let's get some reaction now to what we've got here. Sammy Wilson, first of all, from the DUP. What will you be looking out for when you eventually get to see this document? What are your concerns?
Well, we're looking for three things. First of all, that whatever the arrangements that have been put in place, that they do not treat Northern Ireland differently than the rest of the United Kingdom. The rumours we are hearing so far would indicate that that's not going to be the case, that Northern Ireland will have different arrangements, both in terms of customs and in terms of having to adhere to EU rules. And secondly, that any arrangements that are put in place are purely temporary. And thirdly, that the ability to get out of those arrangements will rest solely with the UK government and will not be determined by either the EU or some independent body, but as a sovereign government, the government here in Westminster will have the opportunity and the ability to say enough is enough, we have now reached the end of the road and we're leaving whatever agreement has been put in place.
And you as a party would be prepared to vote against a withdrawal agreement that does treat Northern Ireland differently, and then presumably you would be happy that no deal is that the other option?
Well, you know, it's up to the Prime Minister as to whether or not she brings a deal which meets the requirements which have been set out, not just by ourselves, and this is the important thing. These are promises which she made because she recognised that the integrity of the United Kingdom was important, and she's made them time and time again in the House here and to us privately and to the public. And secondly, of course, it's not just an issue for us. There are many of our own backbenchers from Scotland who are concerned about separate treatment for Northern Ireland, the impact it would have on Scottish and Scotland and the demand for independence there, and also many of our own backbenchers who do not want to be tied into some kind of customs arrangement forever, but want to know that if we do have to have a transition period until we get things, proper arrangements put in place to facilitate trade, that we have the ability to walk out of those, and that we are the ones who make that decision.
But of course, if the UK can just walk away, it's not really a fallback, it's not a backstop, it's not an insurance, is it? Because if we can just walk away at any time, that doesn't help those who want to have that confirmation that there will be no border checks.
Well, either you believe that people are negotiating in good faith or you don't. The government has indicated that it wishes to have a permanent future harmonious relationship with the rest of the EU, and that's what it wants to negotiate in that future arrangement. Up to date, we have seen lack of good faith on the EU side because they've used every mechanism they can to try and keep the United Kingdom tied to the EU. But if both sides act in good faith, then there's absolutely no reason why the EU should be afraid of a backstop, to use that term, which allows the EU to say, we have negotiated honestly with you, we believe we have taken this as far as we can, we've got a relationship that we believe can secure good harmonious relationships in the future, and now we want out of whatever backstop arrangement there happens to be.
Just finally, when would you expect to be briefed about what's in this document, given that what you're looking for is so crucial?
I would hope fairly soon. But
you had the call yet?
No, we haven't, and I think that we're not part of the cabinet, so we would expect that the Prime Minister would be telling the cabinet first of all. But we would hope that since she has always said that we would be kept informed of where the direction of travel that we will be called in fairly soon.
Okay, Sammy Wilson, thank you very much indeed. I'll just bring in Simon Hart, now Conservative MP. There's going to be some issues ahead. We don't know what is in that text yet, but listening to Sammy Wilson there's cabinet ministers going in tonight who have deep concern direction this is going in.
Yeah, listening carefully to what Sammy Wilson said, then the 3 points that he was replacing, that's reflected across the Conservative Party as well. But what I think colleagues are going to definitely do is now look at whatever this agreement actually says, and obviously have to compare it with what the alternative outcomes may be. We are now at the end of the road. We can't keep ducking this issue. We can't keep sort of prevaricating. We have to now make a decision, each individually, national interest decision based on the deal versus the alternatives. That is not going to be easy for everybody.
And in your view, are the alternatives, is it simply no deal, or do you think there are other options?
Well, at the moment, the sort of popular noises around no deal, we can't do this, so we automatically default to no deal. I think that underestimates the amount of opposition in this building to no deal. And you can be absolutely sure there are MPs from all parties now making sure that there is some kind of plan to try and block no deal. Now that poses some really interesting dilemmas, because actually if that isn't the default position because Parliament expresses a different view, then what is the outcome? Then suddenly the sort of second referendum thing comes back into the running. But there is huge opposition to that too, and one of the reasons for that is the idea that this place, charged and paid to deal with this problem, can't. So it hands this prickly problem back to the voters. That is a very bad look, and one which I know a lot of colleagues will seek to avoid.
I mean, this is going to be a very, very difficult few days for the Prime Minister. It's been a long, long road to get to the point where there's even a draft agreement ready. What is your message to Cabinet Ministers who are looking at that document tonight?
Well, I think people are singling out Theresa May and saying it's very difficult for her. This is difficult for everybody. It's difficult for her, yes, but it's difficult for the Cabinet, and it's difficult for backbenchers of all parties too. This is not just about the PM and the PM's career and the PM's future. This actually is about, this is a serious moment for the Cabinet. This is not a moment to be making sort of, overtures about your potential leadership ambitions, or, flouncing off in a sort of fit of pique. Actually, this is the moment where we will see whether the Cabinet is up to the task that it was set, which is to resolve this really difficult problem in the national interest. And that does not mean just sort of imploding just when we need calm, careful, measured competence.
Okay, Simon Hart, I'm just going to bring in Jacob Rees-Mogg, who has joined us here. What is your message to Cabinet Ministers going in to read that document this evening, this draft text? What would you be looking for if you were in that room?
Well, if what we've heard is true, this fails to meet the Conservative Party's manifesto, and it fails to meet many of the commitments that the Prime Minister makes. It would keep us in the customs union and de facto in the single market. This is the vassal state. It is a failure of the government's negotiating position. It is a failure to deliver on Brexit, and it is potentially dividing up the United Kingdom. It is very hard to see any reason why the Cabinet should support Northern Ireland being ruled from Dublin.
And is it in your view that Cabinet Ministers who don't agree should tell her tonight and walk away from the Cabinet table?
They should say that they do not agree with it if the text that has been leaked is correct. Interestingly, a text on the future of the United Kingdom is given to the Irish television station first, and not to the British Broadcasting Corporation. That seems to me rather peculiar, that we don't even get told our own future first. It gets given out abroad. I think that's discourteous to the nation.
Theresa May would say, I'm sure, that these have been difficult negotiations. It was always going to be a compromise, and no side is going to get exactly what they want, and you will not get exactly what you want.
Theresa May has said many things. She said that Brexit would mean Brexit. She said that no deal was better than a bad deal. And she said that no Prime Minister would agree to separating Northern Ireland from the rest of the United Kingdom. Sometimes what she says and what she does do not match.
What do you think she should do now? You think that no deal is now, what, the most likely option?
I think she should stick to her promises and her manifesto commitments and her various speeches, which what we've heard of this agreement fails to do. I think trust in politics is very important. It's important the country can trust the Prime Minister, and if this document turns out to be accurate, then it will be very difficult to trust anything that comes out of Downing Street.
But some would say that once that general election result meant that she lost her majority, it was a general election which was about Brexit. that meant that this was always going to be a much more difficult compromise than it would have been if she'd had a resounding victory.
Said only a few weeks ago, long after the election result, that she would not do anything that separated Northern Ireland from the rest of the United Kingdom. It's not since the election that things have changed. It is actually very recently, in post-Chequers, that we have found a complete change in the government's approach, and basically the white flags have gone up all over Whitehall.
And there are some who say that Northern Ireland already has slightly different regulatory checks. They already have a different relationship with Ireland, for example, than the rest of the United Kingdom has. Could they not accept some differences if they were small ones?
No, these differences have been agreed between us as a nation. There are some differences in the devolved settlements in Scotland and in Wales as well. These are not a question of a foreign organisation telling us what the relationship should be between Great Britain and Northern Ireland. And the issue here is that some aspects of the single market may apply in Northern Ireland, and these will be more controlled by Dublin than they will be by Belfast. This is quite improper to allow Dublin to make the rules in Northern Ireland. It's a betrayal of the Union.
So what kind of arrangement would you have liked to see her negotiate? People have talked about Canada Plus, which wouldn't necessarily solve the issue of no border between Northern Ireland and Ireland. There are lots of competing issues here, which is why we've ended up where we have.
That's right, but it is really bizarre to have got into a situation with the customs union where, as a full member of the European Union, we had a very straightforward mechanism for leaving the customs union, the exercise of Article 50. Now it appears that we will have to get the permission of the European Union to leave the customs union. This is a very eccentric way to negotiate. It is a very weak way to negotiate. Yes, indeed, free trade is what I would be in favour of, and if you want to call that Canada Plus or Super Canada, that I think is a good way of phrasing it.
Do you agree with Boris Johnson that the deal as it looked, or the draft agreement as it looked, would actually mean that it would be better to stay in the EU because we would at least have some control over the rules?
Well, as it happens, I can hear the great man's dulcet tones just about 3 yards away from us with a competitor station, and you can probably ask him in a moment. But I think what the government is currently negotiating is not delivering on the referendum result to leave the European Union. I think remaining in the European Union is off the cards, because that would be abandoning a democratic vote enforced by a general election where both the Labour Party and the Conservative Party said that the result of the referendum would be respected, and the Lib Dems, who wanted to overturn it, saw their vote share decline.
Do you agree with some in the Cabinet who have said actually that leaving the EU is the most important thing? Come March, we have to leave and we can sort out our future relationship and other things at that point?
The backstop doesn't allow us to leave the customs union without the permission of the European Union. So it's a lesser ability to leave under these arrangements than we currently have. That doesn't seem to me to be wise, or to meet the requirements of what you're suggesting, of leave in any form and then settle the details.
So, what do you think happens next?
Well, I hope the Cabinet will block it, and if not, I hope Parliament will block it. I think what we know of this deal is deeply unsatisfactory.
And is it your feeling amongst your colleagues that there are enough of them there to block a deal if it's in these terms that we think it might be, and we must stress these are only leaks?
That's right, they're only leaks given to the Irish broadcaster, as I had mentioned before. There seems to be a lot and growing opposition to these very poor proposals.
Jacob Rees-Mogg, thank you very much indeed. So that's reaction here as some of the details, and we must stress these are leaks, these are not details that we have seen in this draft text, but as we're filtering out here, you can see there's an awful lot of activity behind me. These are briefings from people like Jacob Rees-Mogg, of course, from a grouping within Parliament, a Conservative grouping who are very much from the Eurosceptic wing. They are not happy with any sense that the UK would be closely aligned with the EU. As you heard from what he said there, he does not feel that that is a true Brexit. People have talked about Brexit in name only. Some of them will think that that is the case if Northern Ireland is treated differently. We've heard from Sammy Wilson already, who clearly feels from what he has seen that there are issues here that are a problem for his party, and of course the DUP, a party with 10 MPs who mean that Theresa May has a majority. Without them she doesn't, and that is a bit of a problem. And we're just going to speak now to the former Foreign Secretary Boris Johnson. Yeah, I'm very well, thank you. We're live on BBC News. Thank you for speaking to us. We are only at the stage where we're seeing leaks of documents.
That's right, and so we have to be pretty careful, but this has been well trailed. This has been a chronicle of a death foretold for some months now, and I think effectively it's pretty much what Ollie Robbins and Sabine Veil agreed a few weeks back anyway. We're going to stay in the customs union on this deal. We're going to stay effectively in large parts of the single market, and that means it's vassal state stuff. We are going to, for the first time in 1,000 years, this Parliament will not have a say over the laws that govern this country. It is a quite incredible state of affairs. It will mean that we are having to accept rules and regulations from Brussels over which we have no say ourselves. It is utterly unacceptable to anybody who believes in democracy. It is not the right way forward. And there is a kicker. And the kicker is that not only are we going to remain in the customs union and in large parts of the single market, but also we will not have protected our precious union. Because if you look at what they've agreed today, and again we must caveat this and say you look at the reports, then it is also accepted that there must be customs and regulatory checks down the Irish Sea between Great Britain and Northern Ireland, which currently do not exist. And for the first time since partition, Dublin, under these proposals, would have more say in some aspects of the government of Northern Ireland than London. So I don't see how you can support it from a democratic point of view. I don't see how a unionist can support it, and I don't see how you can support it if you believe in the political and economic freedom of this country. So if you ask my question, am I going to vote against it, the answer is yes.
Yeah, I think we gathered that. What about the rest of the cabinet, your former cabinet colleagues? What's your message to them?
Well, I hope that they consider it carefully, and obviously, we'll have to see exactly what it is and have to look at the terms, but it's been extensively trailed, and I think that the right thing for them to do would be to advise the Prime Minister that this would not be acceptable to the House of Commons or to the British people, because it patently fails to fulfil the mandate given by the British people in June 2016. So I think it's time to, and there is bags of time.
But what's your alternative?
The alternative has been well set out by plenty of people in the last couple of years, not least the Prime Minister herself. When at Lancaster House on January the 17th, 2017, she set out a very attractive vision for a free trade deal, a Canada-style free trade deal, coupled with all sorts of other intergovernmental arrangements and partnerships, which I think would be incredibly attractive to the people of this country and to our friends and partners in the European Union. And that's the way forward.
Except people have said that doesn't solve this issue of not having border checks.
I think that as you will have heard people say many times before, I think that the issue of the border in Northern Ireland has been escalated quite deliberately in order to produce this perverse result that the whole of the UK ends up remaining within the customs union and in the single market, thereby effectively frustrating the result of the referendum and the verdict of the people, and basically making a nonsense of Brexit. So I hope the Cabinet will do the right thing, and I hope they chuck it out.
Just one more question. What happens next if Parliament does reject it? Are you relaxed about us going out without a deal?
I don't think anybody on either side of the Channel wants no deal, and I don't think it is remotely necessary. I think, by the way, that the negative consequences of no deal have been exaggerated. I think there would be effects, and they'd have to be dealt with, they'd have to be managed. I'm not going to deny that for a second. Of course that's true. But I don't think it's anything like as bad as people currently pretend. But nobody wants no deal, just as nobody wants a hard border in Northern Ireland. It is possible to fix these problems.
People talk about it being bumpy and there being difficulties and short-term. We're talking about people's jobs and the economy, aren't we?
We have abundant time between now and what's called the end of the implementation period at the end of 2020 to get this right, and we can get it right.
But what we should do, drill to get that.
That's right. So what we should So what we should do now is scrap the current backstop arrangements in the current withdrawal agreement, and we have time to do that, and then have an agreement in which we both split that they don't want to have a hard border in Northern Ireland. The European Commission joins with that ambition. Nobody wants a hard border in Northern Ireland. You have a withdrawal agreement setting that out, setting out all the other terms that need to be established, and then you go forward over the next couple of years to do the free trade deal. And that's what we should do.
Boris Johnson, thank you very much indeed. So as you can see, the reaction here, initial reaction anyway, from a certain group of those in the Conservative Party, not happy with the leaks they've seen, and again worth emphasising, we haven't seen the full text. Cabinet ministers right now are getting to see it.
So just to underline where we are right now, Vicky, you've spoken to several people now in the past 45 minutes or so. What is your sense of people's take before they actually see the full text as agreed? What is your sense of their expectations?
I think, as Boris Johnson said there, the direction of travel has been clear for some time, which is why we've had talk and mutterings from those in the Cabinet now, not those who resigned like Boris Johnson, that they were unhappy with the direction of travel. The difference being that some of them have decided to stay in the Cabinet to see the detail, which is what they're doing right now, which is why this is such a difficult moment for the Prime Minister, because for the first time those people are going to see the details and decide whether they can back her or not. But it's clear from people like Jacob Rees-Mogg, from Boris Johnson, that they will not be happy, from Sammy Wilson as well. That's several MPs you're talking about there, and then you have to go to those on the other side, to the other wing of this argument, if you like. People like Boris Johnson's brother, Joe Johnson, resigning from a very different point of view, because he feels that you might as well just stay in the EU than have this agreement. And it's always been the problem for the Prime Minister that you compromise so much, you don't please anyone at all. But then, having said that, there are dozens of people like Simon Hart that we spoke to who are loyal to the Prime Minister, and they don't want to see a no-deal scenario, and that might just focus their minds enough to back her if that vote comes to this place.
Vicky, thanks very much. We'll be back with you later, Vicky Young there, with the latest then. A very busy Westminster, of course, today. Everyone really now just intensifying the debate around what